Hello, and here we go for the next episode of Story Time. So, Roz has just left the farm. The children ordered her to run away with tears in their eyes, but she had to follow orders, so she's left the farm. Mr. Sharif doesn't know yet. I don't know if we'll see if he finds out or not, or how the two of them get on their journey. Let's see. Chapter 50, The Free Robot. At long last, Roz was free. But as she ran away from the hilltop farm, she didn't feel free. She felt something more like fear. She feared being seen and captured and destroyed. She feared for her son's safety, so Roz camouflaged herself. She avoided the fields and kept to the trees, and with Brightbill as her guide, she carefully kept north through farm country. The wild robot's long journey had just begun. Very short chapter. Chapter 51. The Airship. The sun was up and our friends were on the move. They were travelling quickly and quietly along the narrow strip of forest that cut between vast crop fields. If not for that very nagging fear of being spotted, it would have been a very pleasant hike. Wind whisked through the leaves, insects hummed and chirped, farm machines rumbled in the distance. And then there came a new sound, a buzzing sound. Our friends hid in the underbush of an airship, and an airship rose from the horizon ahead of them. It was a sleek white triangle, flying low and fast. Roz adjusted her vision and saw familiar robots gazing out the front window. Recco 1, Recco 2 and Recco 3 had been destroyed back on the island. Perhaps these robots were Recco 4, 5 and 6. "They're flying towards Hilltop Farm," said Brightbill. "We need to keep moving," said Roz. The airship disappeared to the south and the travellers continued north at a faster pace. They hurried through more strips of forest, passing squirrels and birds and groundhogs and other friendly creatures. But the robot and the goose had no time to chat. Later that day, the trees came to an abrupt end. Roz and Brightbill stood at the forest edge and faced an ocean of wheat. The wheat was still young and green. It gently waved in the wind and spread out as far as they could see. "What should we do?" asked Brightbill. "We need to keep moving," said Roz, staring across the plains. "But I am not safe in the open. There must be more trees out there somewhere." "I'll take a look," said Brightbill, and the goose launched himself skyward. Up, up, up he went, high into the air, until he finally stopped and floated, just a tiny winged shape against the blue, and then he dove back to his mother. "There are trees in that direction," said Brightbill, pointing. "It's far and about 30 minutes at top speed." "Then we better get started," said Roz. Our friends burst out from the underbush. The robot sprinted through the field, and with the goose flying by her side. Roz had to concentrate to keep from slipping in the soft, muddy soil. But as she stomped on, and far ahead, another line of trees slowly climbed into view. Brightbill suddenly swooped up and out of sight as his mother kept running. Then he lowered back down beside her and squawked, "The airship is returning!" Behind them, a tiny white triangle rose up from the horizon. It was growing larger and louder by the second. If Roz was seen, her newfound freedom and her life would be over. She couldn't take any chances. "Go on without me," hollered the robot, and she dropped to the ground. Brightbill hoped his mother knew what she was doing, and he flew on without her. Once he reached the trees, he perched himself on a branch and looked back. His mother had vanished. The airship, however, seemed to fill the sky. Its shadow filtered across the ground where Roz had just been. But the ship didn't see her, and it detected no electronic signal, because remember, the children had taken it out of her. So it kept going, racing above the trees and over the next field. Its engine noise gradually faded, and it disappeared to the north. "You can come out, Ma!" squawked Brightbill from his branch. A column of wheat stood up in the field. The robot had rushed her camouflage, and it crumbled off her body when she started to march. As she approached the trees, Roz looked at Brightbill in the branches and said, "We need to keep moving." That's close. Chapter 52. The Scout. Would the airship return? Where were the Recos hunting for Roz? Was it only a matter of time before she was caught? It was impossible to know, so our friends tried not to worry about those troubling questions, and they continued sneaking through the farm country, from one wooded area to the next. Roz wore a disguise of mud and weeds and bark. At the first hint of trouble, she would freeze and instantly become a rotten old tree trunk. Then she'd wait for Brightbill to tell her that it was safe to move on. If there were humans or robots nearby, she might have to wait for hours. Back on the island, Brightbill had practiced flying like hawks and owls and sparrows and vultures. He couldn't fly exactly like those other birds, of course, but he was an expert at diving and swooping and darting and soaring. Now he used those skills to secretly scout out the countryside for his mother. He'd fly up from her shoulder and return a short time later to share his findings. You can see him up there. "We're coming to another farmhouse. Let's avoid it by cutting across the field. Beyond the trees a highway. Stay here and I'll tell you when it's safe to cross. Straight ahead is a small town, but I can lead you around it." Brightbill's advice was always good, and Roz always followed it, and together the travellers safely made their way through the farm country. Chapter 53. The Farm Country. During their travels, our friends passed every kind of farm imaginable. Some farms grew crops in vast fields and orchards. Others grew crops in great glimmering greenhouses. Some farms let their animals graze through open pastures. Others kept their animals confined in small enclosures. Some farms had old-fashioned barns and sheds. Others had modern laboratories that made meat, eggs, and milk without any animals at all. There seemed to be an infinite number of ways to produce food for humans. The farms were teeming with robot workers, and Roz couldn't resist spying on them as she carefully slunk past. The robots worked the fields and machines and livestock, their bodies shining in the sun, shimmering in the heat. This must have been how Roz looked back on Hilltop Farm. Were any of these robots, though, like her? Were any of them quietly dreaming of their escape? Or were they all just mindless machines, content with their place in the world? Chapter 54. The Mountains. The flat plains of farm country gradually rolled into hills and valleys. There were fewer crop fields and more forests. The hills grew taller, the valleys sank deeper, the farms disappeared entirely. Our friends had reached the mountains. Brightbill floated on the wind as Roz climbed the slopes. They passed craggy rock formations and rushing waterfalls and meadows lush with flowers. The robot could have hiked on and on, never slowing or stopping, but the goose needed rest. As the stars came out each evening, they found a safe location to settle down. Frost was common in the highest regions, and Roz took a lighter from her tool belt and built small campfires to keep her son warm. They sat around the crackling flames, reminiscing about life on the island, until Brightbill drifted off to sleep. As the sun came up each morning, they'd clear away all traces of their campsite and set off again, deeper into the mountains. Eagles perked on jagged cliffs. Fish splashed through gurgling streams. Chipmunks bickered in the thick undergrowth. It felt good to be back in the wilderness, but this place wasn't home, so the travellers kept a brisk pace. The robot adjusted her camouflage to match the surroundings. In the forest she wore leaves and tree barks. In the meadow she wore grass and wildflowers. In the rocky terrain she wore dirt and weeds. Even way out there in the wilderness she wanted to go unseen. What Roz didn't realise was that she was already being watched. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm going to leave it there, but there's some mountains for you to think about at the end. So we'll have to see who is watching her. Come back next time.